Today we're going to sew Holly's kitty cat dress. It's intermediate level and you will learn how to do a back fastening using the gentleman's cuff technique, how to apply a yoke, using a ribbon for hem finish and using bias binding for couture seam finish. Once you've cut out all your pieces, assembled them and you're ready to go, the first thing you have to do is to interface all the pieces that need strengthening. And we begin here with the pockets because we're going to use applique on them and they need to be quite stiff. Also the front yoke, the back yoke, which comes in two parts. And finally, you can also interface the back fastening. The first thing I want to do is the back fastening, and we're using the gentleman's cuff technique. So first of all, you want to cut in to the back of your dress until the point where it says cut to this point. And then you have got the placket, and one of them is longer, and as you can see it's just ironed in all the way around, and when you buy the pattern there's also a diagram that shows you exactly where to iron it. And the other piece, the shorter one, is also just ironed over, and you just slot that in so that it covers the ironed over part and pin it in. This is actually very easy. And once it's pinned, we're going to top stitch this and it will catch underneath. So we're going from the top all the way down and then across. And you can see here I'm going fairly close to the edge. Make sure your needle is down as you turn. Go backwards and forwards at the end and the first bit is already in. Now take the longer part, as you can see me do here, and put that underneath it. And you just move that so it covers the other part and it is not visible, like that. And then we can top stitch this, and you top stitch it to the point that you want both of those overlapping. So you can see I'm stopping now and I'm sliding the other part underneath it because actually I want to catch those when I sew around it. So watch this. Sorry, it went a little bit blurry. So you go down, you now have got both parts on top of each other and that secures them. Needle down, turn your fabric, you can see it here, you make sure it's on top of each other and go across, and then you come back up and you stop sewing just so you catch the part that's lying underneath it. That's really important. You go just a few millimeters higher. And once you've done that, the needle is down again and you go across. And now you can do this really traditional cross that looks really nice on this. So you just work your way across and then you just go along the side, up the side again, and then back down, creating the cross, then secure your thread, and that basically is it. Center front gathers. The front has actually a little bit more space in it. We want to gather that, as you can see on the little dummy there. So you want to mark where the gathers have to go. And you could actually put a box pleat in there, but we're going to gather it. And then I'm going to gather slightly over, so about 2 centimeters before my snip to 2 centimeters after my snip. Then you put in a needle. And these gather threads, which are done with very long stitch, so are easy to pull. So you pull the top threads as much as you can, and that usually just works out just right. Put a pin in on the other side, wiggle your thread around that in the shape of 8, and that will secure it. And then you can just put your pleats where you want them, and that part is ready to go for later, and we can now put it aside for a minute. Couture seam finish. I like to use bias binding. If you don't have an overlocker, it's a great way to do this. It just gets folded over, and we're going to now attach the shorter side of your bias binding. There's always a slightly shorter side. When you apply your bias binding, you always start from the inside and then you roll it to the outside and you top stitch it from the outside again. And then you stitch right in that groove You don't even need to look at the needle. Try to just line up with a fixed point on the presser foot and go down. And once that is done, cut back that seam allowance and roll your bias binding to the outside. So you can see I'm about 2 millimeters off here. And on a puff machine, the beautiful thing is that you can actually adjust your needle position in both directions, so you can find a really good fixed point. And once that's done, we're just going to close our side seams by putting those on top of each other. Seam allowances are very important. You need to find that first line next to your presser foot and align the edge of the fabric with that, and that will give you a beautiful seam. Now we're going to do a hem with ribbon finish. I'm doing this because when you turn in jeans, it can be really thick. But if you just apply a ribbon to the right side of the garment, it's about halfway here as you can see, and top stitch it like that, then you turn your hem up and pin that, you get a really good finish. And I'm going to top stitch this again in a minute close to the edge of the ribbon on the other side. And because this was all hard work, I made myself a coffee, and so should you. And then you top stitch it down again. And again, I moved my needle position over to the right a little bit so I could line up the edge of my fabric with the center of my presser foot. So you have to see what your machine has in terms of features. Most machines only do moving over to the left. Now we're going to do the kitty cat pockets. First of all, we're going to apply the eyes and the nose, and if you're not quite sure, you can use the template to find the exact spaces. And I'm using a triple stitch for this again, just like on the baby bird dress, because it makes the thread look really thick like an embroidery thread without actually spending the money on embroidery threads. So make sure that you always stop when the needle is forward and then turn your fabric a little bit and then go again. And here you can see I've got my nose and my eyes done. Now I can put the pupils on in the position that I want them to, and I've also top stitched those. Now I can do my eyes. I draw them with pencil. Of course you could do it with tailor's chalk, but I want it to be clearly visible for you guys here, so I've done them with pencil. So I just draw them in just like they are on the template, and then I'm going to use my triple stitch again to sew them in. Now on the eyelashes, you could actually do the ears first, because some of the eyelashes might actually look really cute if they go over the ears. I didn't do that here. If I did it again, that's what I would do. And just remember to always have the needle down when you turn your presser foot. That's really important. Now to position my ears, I've actually cut them out of the template because I found that a bit difficult. So if I cut it out of the template, here we go. It looks perfect, and you can see what I mean about the eyelashes. If you did the ears first, it probably would be a little bit better. Then you stitch those down as well. Now place your fabric, your lining fabric, over the top. Right sides have to face each other, so the wrong side is now facing you. And then we're going to sew all the way around, leaving an opening gap down here. And because this is magic on a video, it's already done, and you can see my little opening gap there. Then I've cut back my seam allowances and also snipped anywhere where I have a sharp curve or recess. And then you just turn it inside out, give it a good press, and it's done. Now I position my pocket onto the dress, and I want it to overlap to the side seam. I think that looks really cute. So I pin it on, turn the dress inside out, then place my other pocket over the top, right sides facing each other, put this dress on top of each other so the side seams are exactly on top, and then just through that layer I pin my pocket on, and unfortunately I didn't record that. You can just see me doing the start there, but you can see my pins through. I've turned the dress back to the other side, and now I can properly pin it and remove those two holding pins that I've just put in from the other side. And then I'm just going to top stitch this all the way from one ear to the other and leave the middle open, and that's actually your pocket. And here you can see it finished. Now all I have to do is finish my whiskers, and I'm going to draw them out again in pencil onto my dress, and then I'm going to use the triple stitch again to do that. Applying bias binding to the armhole. Now that is a fantastic trick. If you have bias binding, you want to iron it flat and then iron it lengthways in half, then put the rough edges on top of each other, and I'm applying this here to the right side of my dress, and I'm only going to put in one pin, and we're going to stitch this onto the right side of the fabric again. And what I've done here is, again, I've moved my needle position over to the right a bit so I could line up my presser foot with the edge of the fabric, which is rough, and that makes it a lot easier. And then when you watch what I do here, you can quite clearly see that the bias binding stays straight, and I'm moving the fabric to fit the bias binding. Also make sure that none of the seam has folded over. So keep your bias straight and then move the fabric underneath it to fit. And that works really well. It takes a bit of practice, but it's a good thing to do. Backwards and forwards, and then cut your seam allowances back. Now we're going to do some understitching, as you say in America, and top stitching the seam allowance back, as you say in England. So I'm top stitching my seam allowance into the bias binding, and that gives me a beautiful edge that will not roll out. This part is very, very important. You've got to do that. And then I do another stitch on the edge of the bias binding, and if you really stuck to all your seam allowances and you've been very accurate, then it will have the equal distance from the edge of the fabric and look really nice. And here you can see that it looks very, very even and very clean from the inside as well, so that's a very good look. Now we're going to sew and attach the yoke. First of all, you want to close your shoulder seams, and because it's magic, it's already done here. Now there are some snips here. That's where, if you look at the little picture on the side, that's where you actually have no dress part, so it's open. That's the shoulder, so that needs shutting. So we want to sew all the way around the neckline of this. So I've placed my lining right sides facing on top, and I make sure that I put a vertical needle in both snip positions, so I know that's the part that I actually have to sew shut. That's my shoulder. So now you sew all around the neckline with 1 centimeter seam allowance again. And you can also go down the side. And finally you close those shoulder areas as well. Don't forget to go backwards and forwards. Then you need to snip the neckline. That's very important, so the fabric has got somewhere to go, otherwise it'll be really tight around the neckline, and that's not what you want. Cut back a little bit where you have your shoulder, and then turn the whole thing inside out, iron it, and we can now attach it to the outside of the back. We're starting there. So make sure that you move your seam allowance over so that that is exactly on the edge, and then just work your way along to the point where it's shut, and that should really line up exactly with the end of your dress there. And you could wiggle this out a bit from the inside there, that's quite nice, and pin it. And once that's sewn, you will just tuck in the lining under. So now I'm doing this on the other side. Now if you find it a little bit difficult here, what you can do is you can snip all the way down where you attach the dress, and that might be easier for some of you, but actually I am always a bit scared that that might fray, so I don't tend to do that. I rather fiddle a bit with it. Now I'm going to sew this on. Again, 1 centimeter seam allowance. Do it quite slowly and carefully. Then cut back, turn it, and as you can see, when you turn this in really nicely there, you get a really beautiful corner, and you can pin all that in. Then we can do our front as well. And to do that, we need to turn the dress inside out, and we find the center. So in this case, I'm going to do a little snip in the middle, and then I'm going to put that onto my jeans and put my center pin in. And I tend to put one pin on one side first and then on the far other side, and then attach the rest, so I know where it all has to go and where I have to ease in a little bit. And you can adjust your gathers there a little bit until you're really happy with it, because you can't do it afterwards. So take your time and then sew it in exactly from the point where the jeans starts, and you want to go right through the center of your gather stitching. And on the other side, you can see me pull out the fabric here a little bit. Make sure it's always nice and flat. Don't overstitch this. You're going to end up stitching things in you don't want to stitch in. And then we can just turn in our lining and we'll pin it. And this of course takes me a little bit longer than the 2 seconds that it does when you watch the video. Just take your time. Then I'm going to top stitch all the way around the edge. I'm not starting on any edges. I'm starting somewhere in the middle where you can't really see that I've started, where people won't look. So don't start on the corner somewhere. That's really hard then to get right. And I've also used a really thick top stitching thread, which I think is really nice. And I'm going to go all the way around. One thing I want to point out is when you're working with a thicker top stitching thread, you need to set your tension a lot higher. So I'm actually putting my tension dial up to 8, and that will complete my yoke. And if I've pinned this very nicely underneath it, I should catch it all. Buttonholes. Now, people are scared of those. Don't be scared, just watch very carefully. And I'm just marking the center for the moment. That's halfway of the yoke. And then I'm putting my next button on where I want it. And I just do that visually actually. You don't need to measure that necessarily. Mark the top of your buttonhole only. That's really the only important one. The lower one isn't really essential because it comes out in a minute anyway. Then check your visual mark, whether it's right or not. And you can see I need to adjust it ever so slightly. I take my button, place it on the buttonhole to see how deep my buttonhole has to be. Then put the needle down exactly on that cross you've got marked by your pins. Remove your marker pins and then do your buttonhole. And every machine is different. You may have a Janome, which actually works backwards on the buttonhole, not going forwards. So you just have to check that out on your machine, how that works. I like to go forward, do a bar, go backward and do another bar. And the button should fit easily between the two bars. Now I'm going to place my needle down exactly on my marker pins again. Make sure that the foot is central on your placket. Then put the foot exactly on the right length, and then I work my way down, bar, back up and bar. And I've got my next buttonhole done. Now to open these up, I always use a quick unpick, and then I would use an embroidery scissor to go right into the corners there. Finally, how to sew on the button. You want a double thread with a knot at the end. You want to go through the corner of the buttonhole, and where that hits, you're going to place your button. You need to make sure that the button sits on your nail so it's slightly loose as you put it in, so that when you do the button up, it's not tight and it has got a little bit of wiggle room there. So now do it up and check it's all in the right position, and you can see that lies really nice and flat. And then you do the same with the other two buttons and put them on. Minnie Mouse bow. I like making little bows to go on my garments. They are very easy to make. All it is a little rectangle and another little strip of fabric ironed over, and they go together and make this beautiful little bow. So you can see here I've got a rectangle. The rectangle is 17 centimeters long and 9 centimeters wide. You iron in the outer sides, the long sides, until they overlap, then bring in both sides, and I'm just using a running stitch across the middle to hold that all in place, and then you just wrap your thread around it. Now the next one, I've got another really long strip there, and I've ironed the strip towards the middle so I can now sew it on. So now you take that strip and you put it on there with the right side actually facing upwards, and then cut it back, turn it in and place it on top of the other bit and just sew those two bits together. I suppose you could have a rough edge there, it doesn't really matter. But once that's secured, you've got a really nice bow. If you want to see how that's done slower, I've got a special video for that that shows it in a little bit more detail and much slower. Now I just want to attach the bow to the front of the dress, and the way I do that is I go all the way through from the back. And then from the outside, if you like, you can also have a few stitches on either side of the bow. I've done that so it can't go anywhere. So thank you for watching Holly's Kitty Cat dress. As ever, the digital pattern is from frocksandfrolics.com, available through the website.